Alright, so here we are benchmarking the Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I'm just going to refer to it as a Suicide Squad from here on out for obvious reasons. Today we're testing this with the RTX 4070 that is paired with a 12700K CPU running at stock clocks, and then that again is paired with DDR4 4000 megatransfers per second memory, 32 gigabytes of it, and we'll be testing at 1080p, 1440p and 4K. Just quickly want to show you one thing in the settings here. The game actually has a very weird FPS lock. I'm going to leave the frame rate counter up there so you can actually see what's happening. If you want to get rid of the frame rate cap, you can see that we do have a VSync enabled here, and I've got this PC connected to a capture card. So I mean, VSync is enabled, but it's not working. So if you disable VSync, it's going to cap your frame rate to your target frame rate. So even if we select 60 there, it's going to cap it to 60, which is, I mean, this is not expected, but not entirely unexpected. I don't know how to put it. It's got a target frame rate of 60. But then if you do enable VSync, then the frame rate cap disappears. But you have to disable VSync in Nvidia control panel for this to work. Right, this is the only way I could actually get rid of the FPS cap. Tired of being bombarded by Windows activation screens, frustrated about not being able to personalize your own PC, flabbergasted that you can't even change many of your sound settings, head on over to scdkey.com using the link in the description below and get 25% off on Windows 10 Pro keys. Remember to use code MPR2024, click apply, click on submit order, select your payment method, and your Windows 10 key will be emailed to you within a few minutes. If you're doing a fresh install of Windows, click on I don't have a product key, select the version of Windows you want to install, and continue with the rest of the installation. If you're activating an existing copy of Windows, the steps from here on out are the same for you. Once the installation has completed, click on start and start typing activation. Click on activation settings, then click on change product key. Copy your key received from scdkey.com, click next, then click activate. And would you believe it, just like that, you are now able to personalize to your heart's content, and you can even now upgrade to Windows 11 if you so desire. To activate your Windows today, click on the link in the description below, and don't forget to use code MPR2024 for a massive discount. All right, so we're at 1080p. I'm just going to be using DLSS and DLAA for these tests, and we're on the high preset. There are 3 presets, low, medium, and high. So we'll be starting off on the high preset, and the reason for that is because we are actually CPU bound. At 1080p on the high preset without any upscaling, we are CPU bound. You can see our GPU usage is sitting in the 70s there, and luckily there's some fighting. I'm not going to be wasting too much time testing at 1080p. I mean, we're not going to get a good idea of what the performance is actually like with this GPU, but I mean, it's not a terrible pairing. A 12700K CPU with a 4070, which is pretty much equivalent to a 3080 when it comes to performance. So I mean, it's definitely what I'm trying to say is it's not a terrible pairing at all, but we are very CPU bound. So I've even tested it on 1440p, and on the medium preset we are CPU bound still as well. I'm just trying to get used to all these traversal mechanisms. Still a little bit confusing to me, but this is pretty much our benchmark run, just from the one end of the street to the other. And now you can see we had an average here of, I mean, if you look this way, getting 160 frames per second. This is the new Ocean View, by the way. So Warzone players would know. 99 average frames per second here, and our 1% laser sitting at 55, and our 0.1% laser sitting at 34. So I'm just going to enable DLSS quickly just to show that we're fully GPU bound. Enabling DLSS does not make a difference at all to our performance. I'm just going to get rid of the minimums there quickly and enable DLSS. So just going with DLSS quality, let's save that, and you can see we're still getting just below 100 frames per second run, and now GPU usage has just gone down to around 60% GPU usage. I'll be testing ray tracing as well, but you need to restart the game for ray tracing changes to take effect, so we'll do that at the end of this video. All right, let's move on to 1440p. Right, so we're at 1440p with DLAA and medium preset here, so no upscaling at all. Native resolution, let's reset our numbers, and I mean, we are actually getting a higher frame rate than previously. We were getting around 100, now we're getting 110, or I don't know. Anyway, it'll probably even out, so we'll probably still get like around 100 frames per second here. Got no idea what I've got an idea of what I'm supposed to be doing. I've got no idea what I'm doing with the with the traversal here. I did the tutorial with the keyboard and mouse combined. I actually tried to run a few benchmarks in between, but gameplay was very inconsistent. It's very difficult to get a decent benchmark run in when like you're locked to specific areas. If you leave the area, you die. Anyway, so here we are, and I think that was quite nice. We'll just be doing the benchmark run here, as there is some action, and it's also not going to be the longest benchmark run in history. Right, so as you can see, our average is once again 101 frames per second, pretty much the same as a 1080p. We're still not fully GPU bound. You can see our GPU usage is fluctuating quite a bit, but not too much. This is pretty much where I'd personally played if I had to pair a 1440p panel with the RTX 4070. I'd probably not even use DLSS, because DLSS in the CPU bound scenarios, as I showed earlier, does not really help. But let's enable DLSS. Let's see if we can actually get a little bit of a higher frame rate here. Alright, so we just have DLSS set to quality, getting 105 frames per second. So exactly the same. So let's disable DLSS once again and move on to the high presets. Alright, we're back with DLAA and the high preset here. Let's just go back into the game and reset our numbers. And our performance hasn't changed that much, probably lost around 10 to 15% at most, depending on, I mean, we'll see. There's a lot of fighting happening. Maybe we will drop. I'm not used to shooting the controller at all. I don't think I've got any bullets left. That's unfortunate. My teammates will have to do all the killing here. I'm just going to be doing this acrobatics through the street here. But you can see getting around 90 frames per second still. The game does look slightly better on the high preset. It doesn't look terrible on the medium preset at all. And I mean, the performance is definitely acceptable. I think you'll be okay even with 60 frames per second, right? And we got some ammo. Even with 60 frames per second, you should be fine. Personally, I do prefer a higher frame rate than the 60 if the PC can handle it. But yeah, you can see our average here is sitting at 95 frames per second, our 1% lows are sitting at 54, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 33. I'm going to enable DLSS here with the high preset. This will make a little bit of a difference, I believe, but let's see. All right, so DLSS set to quality, just saving the settings here, and let's see if we gained something here. I mean, we went from 94, 95 to 100 frames per second. So now we are once again CPU bound. Our GPU is just even dropping into the 50s there. Definitely not making full use of the GPU at all. And as I said, Ocean View, we're getting 150 plus frames per second. But I mean, doesn't really matter what settings you use with this GPU. If you've got a 12700K or equivalent CPU, you're going to be locked at around 120 frames per second, depending on where you are. If we go much higher, I think we started our benchmark run way higher. The frame rate is much higher as well, purely because there's not a lot happening up there, and it's not as taxing on the CPU, so we do have a little bit of headroom there. Anyway, nothing to write home about here. Like, we're getting the same performance with and without DLSS, give or take a few percent. Like, it's up to you, depending on whether it can actually maintain this frame rate without DLSS. Play it a little bit, and if you do need DLSS, the option is obviously there, but just make sure you don't run into a CPU bottleneck, which will mean you won't get a higher frame rate if you do change graphical settings. Alright, so that's it for 1440p. Let's move on to 4K. Alright, we're now at 4K, and same settings pretty much, just on the low preset now with DLAA. Nothing else has changed. No ray tracing is being enabled here, and the game looks plenty good at 4K. This is actually the capture card has got a bypass to a 4K 60 Hz monitor here, and that's where I'm playing, and it looks great even on the low preset. It looks pretty good. Let me reset our numbers, because I think I did mess it up a little bit. Now, the system requirements for this game actually dictate that you need a 12700K with a 3080 for 4K 60 high. Don't know exactly what they mean by that, but testing earlier, we were not able to hit 60 frames per second on the high preset, and that was with ray tracing enabled in the system requirements. So definitely a lot of upscaling happening there, or they account for a lot of upscaling in the system requirements, which isn't, in my opinion, it's not a good thing to rely on upscaling when you put out system requirements. Like, give the people native performance, and then if they're not happy with it, then they can obviously enable upscaling. But I do think it's a little bit disingenuous to claim 60 frames per second 4K high with ray tracing, but no mention of upscaling anywhere in the system requirements. But that's just how it goes. Like, I'm not complaining about that specifically. Like, there's nothing we can do. It's been like that for a few years now. I'm just pointing it out. All right, so we did have a pretty good average here. Our average is 67, and our 1% laser sitting at 54, and our 0.1% laser sitting at 41. All right, I'm going to enable DLSS here. I do think we'll be CPU bound once we enable DLSS again. Well, I know we will be because I tested this earlier. All right, so DLSS quality, still the exact same settings. Otherwise, let me just get our frame rate counter up here again. And you can see we are back to that 110 frames per second point. Like, that's where the CPU caps out at, right? I mean, in this specific area, it's the GPU usage is dropping while the frame rate is staying at around 100, which means we are CPU bound. There's a lot of graphical glitches in this game, actually. I don't know if you saw that white flashing there. I did see that previously. Actually, this is my third attempt trying to record this video. It's just that it's never been. I've never been able to get consistent gameplay until this specific spot, so I just decided to rerun everything anyway. So, but you can see we're getting around 110 frames per second to 108 frames per second on the average. Our 1% laser sitting at 77, 78, and our 0.1% laser sitting at 52. All right, let's move on to the medium preset. Right, so on the medium preset with DLAA enabled, no ray tracing still, and we will definitely drop below 60 frames per second. Yeah, I'm pretty sure of that. Let's fight a little bit, and like, dropping it to 58, definitely not the end of the world. I mean, if you're aiming for 60 frames per second, some people maybe would mind that if they don't have variable refresh rate monitors, and you do get some screen tearing below your monitor's refresh rate. But other than that, doesn't really change the gameplay that much. I mean, dropping from 65 to 58, not the biggest drop, and if I was aiming for 60 frames per second, I personally would be okay with that. All right, so let's see what DLSS can do for us. All right, so DLSS set to quality, and let's see if we still get 100 frames per second here. There we go. Okay, so pretty much the same as a 1080p on the high preset, 1440p on the high preset. With DLSS, like, this game seems to like the 100 frames per second mark, and we are slightly CPU bound again. The GPU usage is dropping the further we progress here. It's 93%. So even at 4K, we are CPU bound. I mean, we're not running at 4K native DLSS set to quality, but I would have expected it to be GPU bound at these settings, actually. But color me surprised. Alright, let me just get rid of these guys, and then we'll run to the end of the pier. I'm calling it a pier because it's got an ocean view. It's not a real pier. I know what a real pier is. Anyway, getting an average of 99 frames per second, so almost 100. Our 1% laser sitting at 57, and our 0.1% laser sitting at 38. I'm not going to enable more aggressive upscaling because then we'll for sure be CPU bound. All right, let's move on to the high preset here. All right, so the high preset just with DLAA again, and now we probably won't be able to hit 60 frames per second. We're not far off. We are sitting at 54 frames per second. The frame time graph is quite inconsistent now. The gameplay is definitely not as smooth as it was earlier. Like, even if the frame rate was like not much higher, there's a lot of input latency now all of a sudden. Like, even with the controller, I can feel it. Not ideal, and I do think it's the inconsistent frame time graph. It seems to have, I mean, as I said, that it seemed to have flattened out a little bit, but it's a little bit inconsistent at times. Right now it's quite okay, but at the start of our run, like even there, like it's quite inconsistent, and those stutters you actually do feel. Right, so on the high preset, we're not able to maintain 60 frames per second, so I'm just going to say it once again, the system requirements lied to us, and this is even without ray tracing. So let's enable DLSS. I don't think quality will get us 100 frames per second here, maybe DLSS balanced, but the game does look absolutely great at 4K. Like it's not the most visually impressive game so far, like from 2023, 2024. But at 4K, it looks pretty crisp, I must say. All right, let's see what DLSS can do for us. All right, so DLSS set to quality. Let's see. I was almost surprised to see another 100 frames per second there. Let's reset our numbers and run around. But we are once again becoming slightly CPU bound, which is quite strange. Like this is the highest graphical settings just with DLSS set to quality. It seems to be okay now, but there were definitely some areas. Maybe it was just some stuttering, maybe shadow compilation or traversal stutters. I'm not entirely sure. So I mean, you can see it does maintain above 60 frames per second. Even our 1% lows are pretty close to that 60 frames per second mark, if that's what you're aiming for. Not the worst experience. This might need to use DLSS balance to get us closer to like 110 frames per second. So let's go ahead and do that right now. All right, so saving DLSS balanced. Let's reset our numbers, and now we're back to 100 frames per second. This is actually pretty good. I mean, if you don't want to play with ray tracing enabled, want to get a decent high refresh rate experience, like it's not the highest obviously, because we're getting around 90 frames per second, but it's plenty good at 4K with an RTX 4070. I mean, not true 4K. Don't be all angry in the comments. I do know it's upscaling, so it's definitely not true 4K. But we basically doubled our frame rate going from native to DLSS balanced, and balanced still looks plenty good at 4K. You can drop it down to performance even at 4K and it'll still look pretty good. But you can see the frame rate is quite inconsistent. Look at the frame time graph there. Now it's smooth again. So I do think this game can definitely still benefit from some patches, some optimization. All right, that's going to be it for our non-ray tracing tests. Let's restart the game and test with ray tracing enabled. All right, we're back at 1080p, DLAA, high preset, and ray tracing is enabled. And I must say, I wasn't expecting this. CPU bound, like 83% GPU usage. Yeah, it's getting around 60 frames per second earlier. This is, I mean, dropping below 60, that's fine. I did expect that with ray tracing enabled. I do think they only use ray traced reflections in this game from what I can see in the options anyway, but being CPU bound means that DLSS is probably not going to make a difference here unless we actually reduce the resolution of the rays that's being traced, if that makes sense. I don't think we'll be getting much of a performance improvement here when we enable DLSS. So let's go ahead and do that. But our average here was 71 frames per second, our 1% low sitting at 44, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 33. For those of you wondering why I'm reading it out, some people did ask me to do it as they're watching on mobile and they can't always see the metrics on screen. So let's just go ahead and enable DLSS here and just use quality. Let's save that. Did we get a boost in performance? Nothing, right? Because we are CPU bound. So this is pretty much the performance we'll be getting at all resolutions when we are CPU bound. Like this is theoretically the maximum frame rate that we can get when we enable ray tracing. I did not expect this game to be this CPU heavy, I must say. I'll give it a shot on the 14600K. Like it is quite a bit faster than the 12700K. Just I mean, it's running at 5.3 gigahertz instead of 4.7, and there's also some IPC improvements. But I mean, you can't really compare clock speeds between different generations. or the different architectures, etc. But I do think it might do slightly better there, as I'm quite disappointed at the moment here, because as I said, this is our theoretical max, like 70 frames per second, dipping below 60 when ray tracing is enabled. Like, even if we do, I'm just going to leave the frame rate counter up there. If we go with the DLSS, let's make it performance, right? Let's save that, and 70 frames per second. So CPU bound, that's what it means. If you change graphical settings, you won't see any improvement in the frame rate at all, and that's unfortunately where we are. Right, so let's move on to 1440p. Like, there's nothing else we can do. We're on the high preset. Even if we lower this to medium, we are CPU bound, so it's not going to make any difference here at all. Right, we're at 1440p DLAA high with ray tracing enabled. Ray tracing will be enabled from here on out, as you need to restart the game for changes to take effect. And getting 60 frames per second here, but I mean, it's dipping below 90% GPU usage, the 80% GPU usage. So once again, like slightly CPU bound, well, very, very much CPU bound at times. But I mean, if it does stay above 95%, then changing graphical settings, enabling DLSS, etc., will make a bit of a difference. But in the areas where it's below 90%, like you won't gain much from enabling DLSS, right? And I don't think we'll gain that much. Maybe in the highest of the highs, but our average frame rate probably won't increase that much. That's my expectation here anyway. But our 0.1% lows are terrible, actually, at 18 frames per second. Our average is sitting at 60, and 0.1% lows, or our 1% lows, are sitting at 38, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 19 at the moment. So let's just enable DLSS. Once again, I don't think we're going to see much of a performance improvement here. All right, so DLSS set to quality, exactly the same settings. We were getting around 60 frames per second. All right, so now we did gain a bit, but now we are very CPU bound. We are sitting at 80% GPU usage, dipping into the 50s here still. So that's exactly what I meant, is that the highs will be higher the times when we weren't CPU bound. At times that frame rate will be higher, but our average will be pretty much the same, I think, because we are once again CPU bound. It's I must say, I'm pretty disappointed, as the 12700K is definitely no slouch, and as I alluded to earlier, or said earlier, it's a pretty good pairing, but we're dipping below 50 frames per second there even. Like, this game can definitely benefit from a lot of optimization. I know that sure, this is I bought the deluxe edition so that I can make benchmark videos, but my plan is to actually refund this as soon as I'm done with the benchmark videos. But now you can see our frame rate average there is 64, so slightly higher than our 61 of previously. 1% lows are sitting at 39, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 28, so also slightly higher than previously. All right, so there's nothing much we can do here to improve our performance unless we disable ray tracing again. So let's move on to 4K. Right, we're now at 4K, just on the medium preset. I do think it's a better preset for this GPU at 4K. Medium preset, DLAA with a ray tracing enabled, and I'm not expecting much here. Let me get the correct buttons here. So 35 frames per second. I mean, once again, there's a big jump in visual fidelity, crispness between 1440p and 4K, even though 1440p was on high end and this is on medium. Sure, there will be some differences, right? Draw detail or draw distance, some shadow details, etc. But when it comes to outright resolution, crispness, sharpness, 4K is much better than 1440p, even though I do get daily a 1440p monitor, but that's because I do prefer a higher refresh rate experience over like 60 at 4K, but that's personal preference. All right, so our average here is 36 frames per second. Our 1% lows are sitting at 28, and our 0.1% lows are sitting at 18. I do think that we will now benefit from DLSS, so let's go ahead and enable that quickly. We might need to enable some aggressive DLSS here, but let's start off with quality. Let's see how much we gain here. Save that and do that. Now we are almost at 60 frames per second. I mean, it's touching 60. It will definitely drop below 60. This is a very peculiar spot because we become CPU bound in this spot here. GPU usage is dropping below 90 even at 4K with ray tracing enabled. And I mean, sure, we do use a DLSS, so it's not native 4K, but the game still looks plenty good with DLSS set to quality at 4K. You can use DLSS quality even up to balance at 1440p in my personal opinion, and then up to performance even at 4K. I know that this benchmark run is quite boring because it's just running from one end to the other, but I'm trying to keep my videos a little bit shorter than usual. All right, so pretty much the same average, right, as at 1440p. There we had 64 or 65. Now we've got 62. 1% laser sitting at 43, and our 0.1% laser sitting at 37. Let's just see if we can get a little bit of a higher frame rate or a little bit of a more consistent frame rate if we do go with DLSS set to balanced. Other than that, or a more aggressive upscaling than that, we probably won't see any more performance gains because we should be CPU bound again. So let's get that up and running. So into the 70s again. And as I said, I think this is pretty much where we'll be tapping out. And once again into the mid 50s. None of our settings here could give us a consistent 60 frames per second with ray tracing enabled. Now the 12700K is not the fastest CPU. You will be able to get a higher frame rate, obviously, if you do have a faster CPU. Some people with the 7800 X3Ds have claimed like 100 frames per second with ray tracing enabled. Although like that's like a 40% performance increase. So it might be that this game can actually utilize the 3dV cache quite well. But unfortunately, I don't have a 7800 X3D CPU to test with. And once again, you can see that our average was slightly higher, right? It was 64, now it's 68. So not gaining much here from using more aggressive upscaling. Let's just enable DLSS performance. Let's see. I mean, I'm going to take away our lows here, if I can remember the combination. There we go. So 74, 75 frames per second. Let's enable DLSS set to, oops, that's the wrong button. DLSS set to performance. Like, let's even do ultra performance. Okay. So 74, 75, like 76, 77. So we gained 2 frames per second, and now we are rendering internally at 720p. I mean, obviously, if we do Ocean View, we do get a very high frame rate, 100 frames per second. But this way, like it's the same. It's all the same, which is, I mean, look at our GPUs. It's sitting in the 60s. So definitely, yeah, this game, as I said earlier, can definitely benefit from some performance improvements. All right, I think that's going to be it for this video. Hope you guys enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button. And as always, we hope to see you in the next one.